What about when there is kind of a broader potential? I mean, obviously your total addressable market is not your ideal customer profile, but maybe when there's a few different ICPs or there's, a few different buyer personas, maybe where the product or service is more kind of use case based and it doesn't really matter as long as they're sort of an authority or have, they're a buying persona. If they've got buying authority, then that's good enough. Would you ever see kind of maybe different weighting in terms of who, like you get a higher comp for one versus another, or what do you see there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a system that I've seen in the past, and actually a system that I implemented at my last company incredibly poorly. And we'll talk about that here in a second. And when I say incredibly poorly, the reason that it was done incredibly poorly is at my last company. Again, I'm totally falling on my sword here, is entirely my fault. But the reason that it was done so poorly is because the weights just didn't make sense. I had one opportunity worth, and this is very confusing comp plan, mind you. This is before I knew everything I know now. One opportunity was worth $9,000 worth of qualified revenue if it was with a PR agency. If it was with just a brand, it was $24,000. But if it was with an enterprise brand, meaning they have revenue over $1 billion, it was worth $44,000. So I'm probably have already lost you. I could feel everybody's eyes glazing over. Well, imagine me explaining this to a room full of 22-year-olds, and it just gets more confusing from there. So there are all of these incredibly complicated facets. And then what happened was the SDRs who are like me, the sales nerds, they go in and say, wait a minute, why would I bother setting an opportunity with an agency for $9,000 when I could get $44,000 for an enterprise? And so they would just go whale hunting, because all they needed to do was set 5 of those a month and they were golden. And so what wasn't fully explained was that there is more to an opportunity than just the average contract value, which is all I looked at. And I created a formula for this, which one of my colleagues dubbed Graham's number, which is actually apparently a mathematical term as well. But so this is Graham's other number. The idea of that you first want to look at the value of an opportunity. So you say, okay, what is the average contract value or the average sales price? Maybe it is $44,000 for an enterprise and $9,000 for an agency. But then you also have to look at close rate. What if you only close 1% of those $44,000 opportunities and you close half of the $9,000? Well, you do the math on that, and it's actually worth it for you to do the $9,000. And then the third aspect of it is the amount of time that it takes to close, because that cycle time is super important. And so if it only takes you 5 days to close an agency and you close half of them versus $44,000, you only close 1% of them, it takes you a year. There's no reason for you to focus on those $44,000 ones. So it's all about assigning those point values appropriately. And people often exclusively look at average sales price or average contract value. And what happens is their sales cycle goes extended or their close rate drops drastically.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially for brand new outbound motions, when they're trying to figure out who should we go after. And one of the things that I always talk about with our clients who are doing that for the first time is like, we've got to figure out where the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Because we are now paying for a more expensive sales motion than the inbound motion. I mean, I guess depending on how you spend your money, but we know that the people cost there, the opportunity cost tends to be higher. And so it's always looking at what is that sort of minimum ACV, or what other things can we factor into that? Because you're totally right. Like if we set our minimum threshold to say it's like 15,000, that's generally speaking when you start to get return on investment. But then there's still enterprise deals that could be 150,000. It doesn't make sense to just send the SDRs after the 150,000, because it's going to take them like 6 months before they book their first meeting. And it's going to take 12 more months before the revenue comes in. And you'll have lost money on that SDR model for 2 years before you start to see anything come back. But then I think the difficulty, like you mentioned, and from your experience, with that past comp model, is it can be difficult to say, well, yes, those are bigger deals, but we also want you to close some smaller ones. So tell me about how you've been able to kind of strike that balance. How do you incentivize sort of that like rabbit, deer, elephant approach, where you're saying like, well, no, we do want some of those because they're big, but we also want some of these because they're fast. And we want you to focus on both. So how do you incentivize that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to assigning the correct point values and assigning the correct books as well. People talk about book building exclusively with account managers typically, but it's an important characteristic for SDRs as well. What is your book of business? If I gave you all, you use the term elephants, I'm always the like, rocks, pebbles, sand, or water kind of guy. It's the same thing here. You fill the jar either way. And so, but if you fill your SDR's books entirely with elephants, well, guess what? They're going to exclusively go elephant hunting. Whereas if you give them a good mix and assign it out in an intelligent way and assign those point values accordingly, if I had to go back and do the point value again, first of all, I wouldn't say 9,000. I would lop off 3 zeros and just say 9 points. I'm not sure where the 9,000, anyway. And I wouldn't say 9 and 24 and 44. I would say probably, maybe marginally more, 10, 12, and 15 points. But to the point where it's like, well, no, there's still value for me to go after the rabbits and the deer, not just the elephant.